Today is February the 25th, 2010. It is exactly 5 years to the day. 5 years since those first 2 episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender aired on Nickelodeon. My first impression of the series was that, another Japanese anime show that was adapted for America, and I didn't really have any interest in watching any of the episodes. In fact, I had expected the show to totally bomb and be cancelled after 5 episodes. Boy, was I wrong. It turned out to be this huge success, and some people were calling Avatar the greatest cartoon of all time. At that time, I thought absolutely no cartoon was better than the Fairly Odd Parents. But I didn't get into the series until about the 4th to last episode of the first season aired, and I becoming a fan of Avatar was all thanks to my best friend, Jamie. He was an avid cartoon buff, even though he wasn't nerdy at all. One day, while we were hanging out, he said, "Bro, you have to watch this new show, Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's really damn good." So, I decided, fuck it, and just watched an episode. It was the Kings of Omashu episode, and from that day onward, I was absolutely hooked on Avatar. It was like Japanese anime, but was American made. The characters were very interesting, the plot was just so fantastic, I can't even describe it. Toph eventually became my favorite character, followed by Aang. In the 4 years that Avatar: The Last Airbender was in production, I had watched every episode from this awesome series premiere, The Boy in the Iceberg, to its absolutely epic series finale, Sozin's Comic Part 4, Avatar Aang. I had all the Avatar video games and of course all the DVDs so I could watch them all the time when I wanted, where I wanted. So yeah, I was a pretty big Avatar fan. Not anymore, though. Something happened. I experienced something that killed the way I viewed any episode, and the series as a whole. And to this day, I'll never watch another Avatar episode ever again. Not even Avatar: The Legend of Korra when it eventually comes out. As much as it pains me to write this, I will tell what happened. My home was robbed over the summer while I was on vacation, and the burglar stole almost all of my DVDs, including my entire Avatar: The Last Airbender collection. I was crushed, but I knew something had to be done. I got a new security system for my house, which cost a fortune to put in. I planned to buy replacement DVDs. Only problem was that I was flat out broke. That security system had cost me my house itself. So now, because I didn't have enough money for Netflix, I was without Avatar. Except when they occasionally aired reruns on Nick, but then, I found something very surprising. When my house was robbed, my entire bed was pulled apart for some reason, and in between the box spring and the mattress, I found a DVD with magic marker written on it reading ATLA 308. ATLA obviously stands for Avatar: The Last Airbender, and 308 was a production code for probably the strangest, scariest, and funniest episode of Avatar, Nightmares and Daydreams, where Aang becomes a neurotic mess after he realizes the invasion of the Fire Nation is in 4 days, causing him to have 2 embarrassing dreams where he forgets his pants and his math test when he goes to defeat Fire Lord Ozai. Then he has a nightmare that was just downright creepy. And that scene always freaked me out since I first watched the episode air back in 2008. It was very strange how the DVD supposedly had only 1 episode. I had no idea where it came from, and I assumed it was a discarded disc where I had burned some copies of some Avatar DVDs. But when I put it into my DVD player, which surprisingly wasn't stolen, I found it was something totally different. It was a menu with a black screen and only 1 option in white blank text. Nightmares and Daydreams, original never-before-seen version. And with no other choice, literally the menu was only 1 single button. I pressed the play button on my remote. The episode started off as normal, so I had no idea what to make the so-called never-before-seen version so special. The sequence of events in this episode so far seemed normal. Aang freaking out over the invasion that was in 4 days, Katara trying to calm him down, and of course, Toph's famous "go to sleep already" line that always made me laugh. But then came the scene that used to scare me, the legitimate nightmare scene, and it's gonna be hard to describe the absolute bloody terror I saw. It was literally just the most gruesome thing I've ever seen. Maybe the most gruesome thing ever animated on this planet. The scene was changed somehow. Aang fell asleep, and the scene cuts to the nightmare. But this time it was something different. Instead of the normal scene, cut to an image of the 4 air temples. The sky was a deep crimson hue and looked at what I described an atmosphere in hell would look like. There was fire coming out of the windows of the air temple. Airbender monks were running for their lives, screaming and crying. Some were covered in blood, some were lying dead in pools of it. I realize now, the scene was depicting the Fire Nation's genocide of the air nomads 100 years ago. The scene started out with Fire Nation troops invading the southern air temple, riding massive flying dragons. Unlike the rest of the series where death is rarely shown and only implied, this scene depicted full-on bloody murder. The air nomad monks' screams were mixed in with the stings of different horror movie screams, creating one of the most painful sounds I had ever heard. This was hell. Then the nightmare cut to the Eastern Air Temple, which only housed air nomad nuns and other female airbenders, and it was worse than what I had saw with the Southern Temple. The Fire Nation in the series was shown to be cunning and methodical in their atrocities. In the scene, they were barbaric and animal-like. The first thing I saw was the airbender nun that taught basically introduced Aang to Appa was stabbed multiple times in the stomach by a Fire Nation soldier. There was blood rushing out of her middle section. The nightmare cut to another scene where a firebender was absolutely tormenting an airbender nun. And not only that, it depicted it exceedingly graphically that... Oh god, it was fucking horrible. At this point, I was in complete shock. I was so tempted to reach over for the remote, eject the disc, and do something with it, but I needed to know what happened next. After the absolutely horrifying and realistic depictions of murder, I saw something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. An airbender nun screamed out, "Not the nursery!" I assumed the nursery was where all the airbender babies were being taken care of. The nun walked into the nursery, and this blood-curdling scream pierced my speakers and almost blew up my television. The images were of dead, mutilated airbender infants. Some of them with their heads removed, some with their arms and legs cut off, and some with their bodies so burnt they didn't even resemble people. Then the scene cut to an airbender infant being brutally killed by a Fire Nation soldier. All I could see was this absolute terror in the nun's eyes. The child was still crying. And the Fire Nation soldier threw the crying infant against the wall with almost superhuman force that it literally exploded. After that scene, I proceeded to vomit my brains out all over my room because I was so fucking disgusted by that absolutely vile sequence. And all I wondered was, what kind of sick, twisted, savage bastard would animate this? How the hell did Mike and Brian not see this? After that horrific scene, the screen then went back to an image of all the air temples on fire. Those savage Fire Nation soldiers succeeded with their plan to kill all of the air nomads in an effort to destroy the Avatar cycle, except for one, the boy in the iceberg, Avatar Aang. The scene cut to Aang screaming loudly, waking up all of his friends. "What's wrong?" a concerned Katara asked. Aang replied, "The nightmares. They keep getting worse." I literally yanked the DVD out of my player and grabbed it and ran outside. I proceeded to let out a primal yell, and like a frisbee I launched the DVD so far over my backyard, over the fence, and into the woods. I wanted that DVD out of my life forever. After weeks and weeks of nightmares about that episode, it then came to light that the episode had psychologically scarred me. And my psychiatrist had told me that the only way to fight it was to never watch another episode of the show again. Least it come back to me. And I took his advice. I wanted so badly to tell the story to someone. But of course, nobody would probably believe me. Some probably will. But others will probably disregard this as probably being nothing more but a hoax. Wow, I was not exactly expecting something like this. Okay, where do I even begin with this creepypasta? First and foremost, this is an extremely graphic lost episode. I mean, I know that I've read and narrated and even written a few pretty fucked up creepypastas on this channel in the past, but Avatar The Last Airbender's Nightmares and Daydreams, the alternate episode, was just... This was definitely something, and shockingly enough, despite the extreme graphic nature that this episode had, this was a very well made and very, very well written creepypasta story. I know that there are some bits and pieces, I'm sure, primarily at the very start up and usually around the ending of the story that might come across as a bit of a groaner. You know, specifically with the person throwing away the DVD at the very end, you know, being traumatized and never wanting to watch the series ever again. Obviously, those are cliches in the story itself that are there, and I will personally admit is kind of a bit of a groaner, but surprisingly enough, it actually doesn't take away too much from the actual pasta itself. Now, for me, I wasn't really too invested so much with the beginning or the ending. I was primarily invested with the episode's description itself, which, again, like I said, was pretty fucked up, not gonna lie. Now, anybody who's ever watched Avatar The Last Airbender will know that this is actually a canonical fact, that during the time that Aang had actually been frozen in the iceberg, the Fire Nation had ultimately wound up ransacking and attacking and basically brutally murdering everybody in the air temples, primarily looking for the Avatar, or at the very least attempting to try and wipe out any last element of the, specifically wanting to wipe out any opportunity for the Avatar to even remotely exist. And in this story, we actually wind up getting a full-fledged, insanely detailed description of everything that wind up going down from there. Which, personally for me, again, like I said, it's extremely screwed up, but knowing what we do know and everything about what actually happened during that time, this is very spot on with the show. If the show was a lot more darker and wasn't meant primarily for kids, I could definitely see something like this being included in the actual series. I mean, could you imagine what Avatar The Last Airbender would be like if it was aimed more for a more older, more adult audience? Including something like this, even though I'm sure that to some people this would be even a bit too much, even for adults, is something that I could definitely see being included into it as a better level of a description. And you know, I will admit that I think it was episode 2 of the first season that we do kind of see some of the things that actually wind up happening. Like, for example, when Aang wind up walking into that one specific area with all the bones of the dead monks, followed by Kyatsu, you know, the dead, completely dead skeletal remains of Kyatsu, basically just sitting there. You know, that's when Aang wind up finding out what really wind up happening there. And, yeah, reading this story and knowing what actually happens in the show just kind of adds a lot more extreme levels of fucked up insanity that went with it. But again, the story completely and utterly manages to tie very well into it. It manages to include all of these extremely fucked up and graphic inclusions and imagery and everything else in this, and it manages to really blend well with the Avatar The Last Airbender universe itself. And, you know, I will admit, if this was something that wasn't or hadn't been mentioned at all in the series, I could definitely see this potentially being a pretty crappy creepypasta or just an extremely overly insane gore fest. But again, like I've mentioned before, what we do know about the series, having something like this be included, or at the very least be something that could have potentially been included, you know, could have potentially been included into the series itself, definitely makes a lot of sense. And that is something I can very much give a shit ton of praise for this creepypasta. Because again, it's graphic, it's messed up, but it perfectly depicts everything that wind up happening to the air nomads, the monks, the nuns, the kids, and everything else that wind up happening in it. And it didn't spare a single level of detail. Now, obviously for the sake of not including certain aspects, primarily because I'm sure that it would be a bit too triggering for some people. I obviously had to not include certain parts into the story or change it up slightly to kind of make sure of it that this video doesn't get taken down, because again, this is a very screwed up pasta. But despite all of that, though, if you want to read it, I'll leave a link down below for you guys to check out. But I can't really go out of my way and say how much I genuinely love how this went out, because it was so beautifully well written and well done and well depicted and well detailed that I visualized everything that went on with this entire story. And what's even better is that it's short, sweet, and to the point. It doesn't go into an excessive level of detail, or specifically unnecessary detail, especially with the very beginning startup. I mean, we primarily have the main protagonist going out of their way and explaining a little bit about themselves and about what they've saw, and how they wind up coming across the actual DVD itself. And then, instead of sitting there and just wasting a lot more time and everything with depicting themselves like many other Lost episode creepypastas do, it basically just kind of saves the main meat and everything for the actual episode itself. And especially given the fact that this is primarily just an alternate version, more or less, of the original episode Nightmares and Daydreams, this is something that, you know, I think was very well put into it. I mean, again, it was extremely fucked up, sure enough, but still. And then, of course, the ending and everything. I definitely can say right now that personally, for me, the ending was a little... although, someone potentially getting traumatized by seeing something like this is not completely and utterly out of the ordinary, or I would say isn't entirely that bad, or whatever it may seem to be. But yeah, if there is one thing, however, that I can criticize this story for, it's the specific line at the very end of the story that stated, "Some will, but others would disregard this as the, quote, biggest viral hoax in Suicide Mouse AVI." That right there is a bit of a problem that I do have that I will knock off 1 point for, because again, sitting there and mentioning another, you know, specifically mentioning another creepypasta inside of your creepypasta and everything is just kind of something that I find to be a lot more, you know, not something you should do. I mean, originally when it was first included, it worked a little bit, but unfortunately it started to become a cliche in of its own right. But that's really the only thing I can actually criticize this story for. Now, I know that some of you probably are going to be like, dude, there's like a shit ton more you could criticize. This was way too fucking graphic. This was way too messed up, you know, all that. Or the inclusion of like the dead kids and everything and all that, you know, being thrown in, you know, primarily for shock. But I personally just don't see that being the case. I think that if the one thing I will definitely praise the author for doing was not holding back with this. It is extremely dark and messed up, but to be fair, I like the fact that there wasn't anything completely thrown out into this. Like, you know, nothing was, you know, pushed back or whatever. This person went all out with the writing itself. And even though it's not like exceedingly long, thankfully, it still manages to get its point across. But of course, like I always say with these pastas, and like what I always will continue to say, this is simply my own personal opinion, and if you disagree with it, that's perfectly fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions in regards to these creepypastas, and this is simply my own personal thoughts. My final rating of this pasta, I'm going to give this one a 9 out of 10. This was a very enjoyable read, despite the exceedingly insane graphic nature that this pasta had. I still felt that the story was genuinely well done, very well written. The grammar was perfect in the story, with the exception of primarily the ending and everything, with, you know, the mentioning of another creepypasta. The story is pretty damn solid for what it is. You know, that's really all I have to say, especially the detail that went into it. Messed up, yeah, but damn, did it add a lot more to it. And to be fair, I think this honestly made me like Avatar: The Last Airbender a lot more, because now I'm going to start thinking about the specific pasta, and just, you know, I think it's actually going to really increase and intensify my love for this specific show, primarily because of it. So props to the author for doing that. So yeah, but what did you guys think about this creepypasta? Did you guys enjoy it? Did you guys not? And also, what would you have personally done to help make this creepypasta a whole lot better? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below. I'm the Shadow Eater. Thanks again for watching today's episode, you guys. I also do want to apologize for the lack of videos recently. Haven't had a whole lot of motivation and everything, but you know what? I'm hopefully finally going to get right back to it. So yeah, thank you all again for being patient with me throughout these weeks, especially with that pretty shitty video that I made last 2 weeks ago, I think. Apologies for that. Not going to happen again. But yeah, thanks again for watching today's episode, you guys, and like always, roll the outro, cause I'm out.
In fear and surprise, as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to leave, glued to your computer screen. The killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed will be from the fear-gripping, horror-driven, nightmarish, gore-filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent screams. Only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at any day.